He's an Elliott Associate Professor of History at Hampden-Sydney College and series editor of American Wars and Popular Culture at LSU Press. He does research around 19th century America, and I mean the 19th century America that involves naval cults, Navy cults. And I'm talking about the revolver, by the way. Special interest in the American Civil War, guerrilla warfare in the Western borderlands, which means all of our listeners are going, we like that kind of stuff. Memory, film, and the Western frontier. By the way, Matthew Christopher Hulbert. .com is where you should go to find out all about him. He actually does a segment here that we have continued from the old platform, Beyond the Bushwhackers, and he's going to be talking about Pat Garrett today. Matthew, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. How y'all doing?
We're doing good. Matthew, you've yet to actually drink a Bushwhacker, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, I've got to get you to Nashville or maybe I just... I got to get you to Nashville so we can do it together. So we can, that's the real Bushwhacker we're talking about here. Okay, Matthew, good morning. What I want to know before we dive into Pat Garrett, and I'm going to ask this question about you first, and at the end of the interview, I'm going to ask it about Pat Garrett. Since you do this show with us monthly, what should your walk-on song be? If Matthew Hulbert's walking on the court, the metaphorical court of life, what's your pump-up song? And it's going to be really funny for pump-up songs, like something really slow.
This has got to be, and Jimmy will love this, this has got to be Morricone, Ecstasy of Gold, but I need it to pan back and forth, like, to different people's faces and then zoom in and out. There's got to be the whole sort of good, the bad, and the ugly effect of it.
It's like a whole produced theatrical situation. I'm here for that.
Oh, yeah, this is more than a walk-up. This is like a whole intro.
Okay,
Oh, my God. By the way, in case you guys don't know who we're referring to, is we actually talked about him last time. He was the composer of the last film we talked about, My Name is Nobody.
Yeah.
All that good Morricone stuff. Perfect for you, Matthew. Perfect for you. I also want to ask you, and we'll get this on the table and out of the way before we get to the actual historical figure. Who do you think is the best portrayal of Pat Garrett in any Western movie ever?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I was going to ask you that.
Oh, well, then y'all can both answer. You go first.
Oh,
you want to ask me? You want me to start? Because mine is a really interesting take. It's not what you think it's going to be. And despite the fact that I think the movie is incredibly flawed and often too much feels like St. Elmo fires with pistols, I will tell you, I think William Peterson is fantastic because of his just kind of sad resignation, the way he looks at Emilio Estevez throughout that movie. I don't think that movie's good. But I do think that there is something about him that is so just kind of like decent in terms of not who the actual Pat Garrett was, but decent, honorable, and this is all going to end bad that kind of plays through that. I think there are better movies with Pat Garrett. I don't know what it is that Peterson, particularly the younger version of him, that sticks with me. That's it.
Yeah, he's good. Young Guns 2 is kind of terrible, although I'm a closet lover of Young Guns 1, the first one.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming out of the closet on our show.
I'm open on it, by the way. I think the last 25 minutes of it are just fantastic movie making, especially the little narration part at the end where they all shake hands and go their separate ways. But go on.
Well, it pains me to say it's not James Coburn because that whole movie is a dumpster fire.
It is. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. He's talking about Sam Peckinpah, by the way. Go ahead.
I would have loved to see, Patrick Wayne as Pat Garrett for like 12 seconds. I would have loved to see Patrick Wayne be Pat Garrett, like full on. Because in reality, he is much older than Billy. Oh my goodness. I'm blanking on the guy's name who kind of looks like Patrick Wayne, who plays him in Chisholm.
Oh God, I can't think of it now. I'm blanking on it too.
He's probably the best movie, like all the way through a film, Pat Garrett, but really, I don't know that any of them actually get him right, which, we could say that long before film too. Garrett is really
Glenn Corbett.
We've talked about people who benefited from the myth-making machinery. Garrett was the opposite. He really was the big loser.
By the way, Glenn Corbett plays Pat Garrett in Chisholm,
yes,
1970s
Corbett.
film, and
Thank
he is
you.
fantastic. By the way, you're right; he's got a great presence. And by the way, this is a really great thing too because myth make the man, cometh the moment, cometh the man. Pat Garrett, and you have to unpack this now. We have to jump into this. Pat Garrett, because because of who he kills, I think in many ways gets the luster taken off of him that other people have benefited from. But tell us who Lawman Pat Garrett, bartender, lawman, a whole bunch of other stuff. Pat Garrett.
If he made seeing though he's a bartender, would he have made a bushwhacker? A bushwhacker, by the way, for everyone listening, is essentially a Wendy's frosty with all the booze in it. But
yeah, everybody's excited.
Everybody's looking forward to it. Yeah,
Go on, Pat Garrett, Matthew. You got some time to unpack.
All right, so Garrett is interesting because he actually has a decent bit in common with somebody we've already talked about based on his age and where he comes from, and that's Doc Holliday. Garrett is a Southerner. He's from Alabama. He's born in 1850. So he's not quite old enough to serve in the Civil War, but he's absolutely old enough for it to alter the trajectory of his life. He's born into a very wealthy slave-owning family. When he's a child, they buy this huge plantation and move to Louisiana. They own several slaves. So, his young life is pretty pampered. They've got servants, they've got field hands. The Civil War obviously comes along and wrecks that. And like many big planters in the late 1860s, when you take the slaves away, these operations are no longer viable. His father dies roughly $30,000 in debt, which would be millions today. So they have to sell off the plantation, and that is what sends Pat Garrett west. But had the Civil War not come along, he would have just remained part of that planter aristocracy, and he never would have had his run-in with Billy Bonney or any of these other Western figures. So he wanders west, first to Texas. He becomes a buffalo hunter. Then he ends up in New Mexico. He is a lawman, and that is partly how he first starts interacting, not just with Billy the Kid, but with Charlie Bowdry and this whole other, the names that sound familiar from Young Guns actually are many of the names of the regulators, but Pat Garrett's not actually involved in the Lincoln County War. He comes along after, when he's living in Fort Sumner. And this is kind of the weird thing about his relationship with Billy the Kid. They get along fine for quite a while. They're basically neighbors. Billy the Kid is at Pat Garrett's first wedding as a guest. They just kind of exist side by side. It's not until later when Garrett is elected sheriff, just at the moment that the law is finally trying to catch up with Billy the Kid, because we've got to start civilizing the West, including New Mexico. Garrett is sent on this mission, and he is one of the true manhunters of the Old West. When you send Pat Garrett after somebody, he's either going to bring them back or he's going to bring back a body. And that is the case with Billy more than once.
Let me ask you this question, too, because we've talked about lawmen in the past on this show who have just simply been sociopaths with guns. And we came really close with Tom Horn to kind of being like, is this a guy who just likes killing, or is this a guy who actually wants to enforce the law? This is a much more complex character, I think, to some degree, right? I mean, do you feel like, to some degree, this is a guy who actually understands his place in the narrative is to begin to end the West? I know I like that, begin to end, but is that any part of his understanding from what we know about him?
I don't know that it's fair to say he is conscious of the fact that he's part of this process of cleaning up the West and allowing civilization to come in behind it. But I think more so than any of the lawmen, including the Earps that we've talked about before, he is firmly planted on the legal side. He doesn't have a past as a horse thief. He didn't used to be a bandit who's reformed or figured out, hey, I'm really good with this gun. I could make money this way. Garrett is known for honesty. He doesn't really have the run-ins or even in kind of the gray space between law and order. So it's not hard to understand why people want him to be the sheriff, but it does make it ironic that of all the famous lawmen, he is probably the least revered, and he was probably actually the straightest shooter in terms of following and enforcing the law. I mean, you could make a case at various times that Wyatt Earp is an outlaw with a badge on, right? I mean, when Holliday's part of the posse, he's an outlaw with a badge on. A lot of these guys are basically outlaws with badges on at given moments. Garrett never really steps into the dark world, but he kills somebody that we like an awful lot, or at least stories about him. So his legacy really suffers for it.
Well, and that's a piece I want to talk about here on the legacy, because I'm curious, Matthew, if Pat Garrett saw himself as, if you think he saw himself as the hero or the villain of his own story, because, I think legacy and legend don't always match the man. So, what do you think it means when you're remembered for one moment, and in this scenario, a big one, which is killing Billy the Kid, remember for that one moment rather than a whole life? And by the way, this is why this segment, Beyond the Bushwhackers, is great, Matthew, that you're able to unpack this man's whole life so that he is remembered for more than that moment. But what must that be like when it's like, I lived this whole life, and that's now what my life is summed up to?
Yeah, well, and he at the time, he's just doing his job. He's captured Billy the Kid once. Other people allowed Billy the Kid to escape, so Garrett's got to go get him again. And this time he's not taking any chances. So as many of your listeners will know the story. They're in Pete Waxwell's house. It's the middle of the night. It's dark. Garrett's in the corner of the room. Billy says, "Q&S, who is it? Who's there?" And, his question is answered with a muzzle flare, and he's shot in the chest, and he's killed. But at the end of the day, Garrett's just doing his job. This isn't the Ford brothers shooting Jesse James in the back of the head. This isn't sort of some of the other assassination-style killings that we've seen. Billy is wanted for murder. He's escaped from jail multiple times. Garrett technically was fully within his legal rights to bring him back. Now, one of the interesting things to think about is if they just don't let him escape, Billy hangs, Garrett doesn't kill him, and he's kind of a minor lawman, but he's not reviled for, basically assassinating a folk hero. Garrett very much viewed himself as the hero of the story. He publishes, his authentic story of killing Billy the Kid. It's also autobiographical about himself. And he really kind of imagined, because he lives into the early 20th century, that he was going to have kind of a Wyatt Earp turn, where because he's one of the last of the old guard Wild West left, and he's published this account, and he's got the receipts, right? He really thought he was going to become this beloved figure, but the memory industry loved Billy more. Billy dies young. Billy's witty. He seems to always kind of be sticking it to the establishment. So a lot of blue-collar people, and especially Hispanos, love Billy. And Garrett shoots him in the dark, again, within his legal rights. But this wasn't the showdown at high noon. It wasn't the fair fight we would have liked to imagine. So his memory really suffers for it, and he is reviled. And then he doesn't die in a particularly dignified way. Garrett, after he stops being a lawman, he deals with irrigation and ditch companies. Then he tries to be a rancher. He basically ends up involved in a land dispute over sheep with some of his neighbors, and one of them basically just rides up. We don't actually know which one. There's a group of conspirators. They just ride up and shoot him in a wagon one day, and people are kind of like, Pat Garrett's dead. And then, 10 minutes later, we're on to the next news. He doesn't move the needle nearly as much as Billy had done, or some of these other Western figures. So he kind of vacillates between he's forgotten or he's the guy who ruined Billy the Kid story. He never really gets to be the star of his own story.
I would make another argument, too, because actually I'm obsessed with the Rough Riders, and I know about, there's a whole bunch of other people that kind of percolate their way into that. And he blows it, too, though, because there's a real opportunity that had he kept his nose clean as a presidential appointment, had he understood what was at stake there in regards to his legacy and not kept – it's the problem. A lot of people get to Washington, D.C. and don't realize you're supposed to steal after the appointment is up. And I'm not saying that he was stealing, but he was already making connections and all that kind of stuff. I don't know the full story, and maybe you can help fill this in a little bit here, Matthew. But the problem is, too, is that he's got a real reputational wash because he's got a really good friend in Theodore Roosevelt. A really good friend who sticks by him through some really nasty accusations from critics because of the Billy the Kid stuff. And he just keeps pushing his luck. And finally, Roosevelt has got to reject him. And in rejecting him, his last chance of becoming the kind of lawman at the level of, say, the Earps or even, what's his name out of Deadwood, Seth Bullock. He doesn't get that, and it's because as for a guy who was so obsessed with being the hero and actually being part of that legacy, he doesn't protect his legacy enough at the customs as a customs agent. Is that fair?
Yeah, he really blows it. So for now that we're like probably more in the weeds than most people will be familiar with, Roosevelt has a soft spot for Western figures. Whether it's Joe Shelby being appointed a federal marshal or, somebody like Pat Garrett or Bat Masterson being invited to the White House and basically being given these patron positions. Garrett is appointed a customs collector. He's not particularly good at the job. When Garrett doesn't know what he's doing, he usually just ends up in a fist fight with people. But Roosevelt views him as a friend, and Roosevelt sticks by him through all of this incompetence. And then what sort of spoils it is Roosevelt invites Garrett to a reunion of the Rough Riders, even though Garrett wasn't actually one. And Washington society, which had not approved of the Garrett appointment in the first place, viewed that as Roosevelt sticking it to them, saying, I can do whatever I want. I'll even bring Pat Garrett to the White House for this reunion. Well, unbeknownst to Roosevelt, Garrett brings a guest with him and tells Roosevelt this is a fancy cattle owner. He's like a high-powered rancher, sort of a Chisholm type. So there's a photograph taken of this guy, Roosevelt and Garrett, and then after the fact, the press learns this guy basically owns a seedy dive bar and brothel. And Roosevelt is livid, and that is what finally forces him to cut ties with Garrett. And then he's basically destitute for the rest of his life after he loses that position. So he really does. He had a real shot with Roosevelt to kind of be on easy street for the rest of his life, and he really does blow it.
Yeah, because as anybody knows the story, and Matthew's got it spot on, is that Roosevelt often would be with you to the last dog died. You had to really kind of blow it with Roosevelt, particularly if there was any kind of mythology or heroism. And there's some real heroism in this story too. I would really suggest people to look it up. I mean, there's some real genuine bravery that runs through Patrick Floyd Jarvis Garrett, by the way. Correct?
Correct.
I mean, he's quite a guy. Do you think, though, that he deserves his own movie? Do you think that he deserves a reclamation project based on where he ends up in regards to his own story? You think there's enough there for a great movie on Pat Garrett?
There's definitely enough there for a movie. It would have to be the right treatment so it didn't just turn into a Billy the Kid movie, sort of moonlighting as a Pat Garrett story. You could do a Tom Horn-style biopic, I think. Garrett's got some really interesting episodes. The first guy that he ends up killing is on accident, and he sobs afterward. He's not this hardened sociopath. The first time he captures Billy the Kid and they're bringing him into Las Vegas, New Mexico, a mob tries to overtake the train car they're in. He's about to hand Billy the Kid a pistol on the train so he can help defend him. That's not a guy who's a coward. Right? You've got the most wanted murderer in the country in handcuffs, but your honor code tells you if a mob overtakes this train, I've got to hand him a gun, and Garrett's ready to do it. He doesn't just kind of run out the back and say, well, sorry, take your chances. He's, at least early on in his life, there's a lot of gumption there. He's the real deal. Of all the lawmen we've discussed so far, if you had to send one guy after somebody, you'd probably choose Pat Garrett. I can't think of anybody who's a better legal manhunter.
He's the I got a guy. He's your guy when you got a guy. He's the Pat Garrett. Right? I mean, he's jokingly, but also serious. Okay, we are unfortunately out of time, so you got to tell me, what is Pat Garrett's walkout song, Matthew?
Nothing from Bob Dylan. Sorry, Bob. As much as I love you, it can't be from that movie.
Terrible.
Oh, God,
Bob.
I should have been thinking about this while we were talking.
Something from Limp Bizkit, perhaps.
No,
I don't know.
No, I feel like Jimmy will like this. It will just be Amelia whistling from Young Guns.
Ooh, eerie. I like that.
Song from Young Guns as he fades away.
That's kind of fantastic, by the way. I think, actually, that you could do a pretty good movie about the train story. I know it doesn't become like a de facto Billy the Kid where you make the kid where you don't actually you kind of really downplay the kid and have the whole thing be about that train ride, but also have it be a flashback and flash forward and use the train as kind of the central kind of locus for what was and what becomes. And that becomes kind of an interesting thing. Matthew Hulbert, by the way, we never have enough time. We will somehow figure out this format yet. Guys, you can find him at MatthewChristopherHulbert.com, by the way. Beyond the Bushwhackers is what we talk. We actually go beyond just their early beginnings and turn them into the legends and myths of the West. It's always great having you, my friend. And we'll talk at you soon, okay?
Sounds good, man. Have a good one, y'all.
Thank you.